Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Yashodanandana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jaya Yashoda Nandana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jaya Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jai Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radhe Jai Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Nitai Gaura Haribol 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 Nitai Gaura Haribol Shri Radha Madhav ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So this is Canto 1, Chapter 17, Text 40. Please repeat after me. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 So I'll start by reading this verse, and then we're actually covering two verses today, text 40 and 41, if I'm correct. Amuni panchasthanani, yadharma prabhavakali, Ottareyena dattani, Nyavasattan nideshakrit, Amuni panchasthanani, Yadharma prabhavakali, Ottareyena dattani, Nyavasattan nideshakrit. Amuni, all those. Pancha, 5. Sthanani, places. He, certainly. Adharma, irreligious principles. Prabhava, encouraging. Kali, the age of Kali. Autareyena, by the son of Uttara. Parikshit Maharaj, the son of Uttara. Dattani, delivered. Nyavasat, dwelt. Tat by him, Nideshakrit directed. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Thus, the personality of Kali, by the directions of Maharaj Parikshit, the son of Uttara, was allowed to live in those 5 places. Once again, thus the personality of Kali, by the directions of Maharaj Parikshit, the son of Uttara, was allowed to live in those 5 places. Purport. Thus the age of Kali began with gold standardization, and therefore falsity, intoxication, animal slaughter, and prostitution are rampant all over the world. And the saner section is eager to drive out corruption. The counteracting process is suggested above, and everyone can take advantage of this suggestion. And let me read the next verse also. We might as well do it all at once. Athaitani na seveta bubhusha purushak vachit visheshato dharmashilo raja loka patir guru. Therefore, whoever desires progressive well-being, especially kings, religionists, public leaders, brahmanas, and sannyasis, should never come in contact with the 4 above-mentioned irreligious principles. Once again, therefore, whoever desires progressive well-being, especially kings, religionists, public leaders, brahmanas, and sannyasis, should never come in contact with the 4 above-mentioned irreligious principles. Purport. The brahmanas are the religious preceptors for all other castes, and the sannyasis are the spiritual masters for all the castes and orders of society. So also are the king and the public leaders who are responsible for the material welfare of all people. The progressive religionists and those who are responsible human beings, or those who do not want to spoil their valuable human lives, should refrain from all the principles of irreligiosity, especially illicit connection with women. If a brahmana is not truthful, all his claims as a brahmana at once become null and void. If a sannyasi is illicitly connected with women, all his claims as a sannyasi at once become false. Similarly, if the king and public leader are unnecessarily proud or habituated to drinking and smoking, certainly they become disqualified to discharge public welfare activities. Truthfulness is the basic principle for all religions. The 4 leaders of the human society, namely the sannyasis, the brahmana, the king, the public leader, must be tested crucially for their character and qualification. Before one can be accepted as a spiritual master or master of society, he must be tested by the above-mentioned criteria of character. Such public leaders may be less qualified in academic qualifications, but it is necessary primarily that they be free from the contamination of the 4 disqualifications, namely gambling, drinking, prostitution, and animal slaughter. Om Jnanam Timrandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadah Mayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Thank you everyone for joining on this Saturday morning. My classes, they start at 8 a.m. in the morning this semester somehow, because it was my first semester. I was given the schedule. I didn't choose my schedule. And so I've been missing the other classes myself. So I feel a little embarrassed to speak, although I have not been attending myself. But hopefully, by the mercy of the devotees here, I can say something a little useful. I just actually first wanted to start with the previous verse. The previous verse talks about how there's 5 principles of irreligion, or not principles of irreligion, but rather irreligion is present in 5 things. And 4 of those 5 are the four regulative principles, which is the regulative principles are actually responses to those 4 principles, which is falsity, intoxication, animal slaughter and prostitution, or gambling, intoxication, animal slaughter, and illicit sex. But then there's a 5th one, which is very interesting, and that is gold. That Maharaj Parikshit allowed Kali to reside in gold. And Prabhupada in the purport, he says that the age of Kali began with gold standardization. And then falsity, intoxication, animal slaughter, and prostitution became rampant all over the world. So it started with gold. And I wanted to ask all of you on this call that why did Parikshit Maharaj allow Kali to stay in gold? Or rather, the question is, why is it that the gold standard and the presence of gold, now obviously Kali went in there because Parikshit Maharaj allowed this, but why is that the beginning of the age of Kali? Why is it that the age of Kali begins with this gold standardization, or it becomes rampant due to this gold? Can someone suggest an answer, a response? I mean, Parikshit Maharaj could have chosen so many other things. He could have said that, Kali will go into silk, right? Not gold, but it can go into silk, or go into greens. Like on Ekadashi day, we see that sin enters into greens. Parikshit Maharaj could have said that Kali will go into glass. Why gold?
In the previous verse, Prabhu, it talks about wherever there is. My understanding is that is where there is a coral. It's not just a gold. I think understanding is that the wealth, right? So people will try to do anything for that purpose, right, to get it.
Yes. No, that's a very nice point. So because that becomes wealth, and with wealth, all these things start. And that's sort of the question that I'm asking is why is it through this form of wealth? Wealthy people have always been wealthy, but why is it specifically through this type of wealth, which is all around the world? We see even in America, Europe, England, it's the gold standard. Prabhupada is absolutely correct in this purport. He's raising a very deep and subtle point. He's saying sinful life began with gold standardization. So people have always been wealthy, but why is it that with the gold standardization, it has caused us so much difficulty?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Guru and God. Prabhuji, I don't have an answer, but I have a rhetoric question. Yesterday, I couldn't ask the question, but I'll. So, by allowing Kali to reside where gold resides, one of the basic things that happened is, if you look at the king's treasuries, all of those were being used in the service of the Lord until then. But now he opened up all of this so Kali could live anywhere gold is, and most of the places that gold was like the treasuries and other places. So he essentially opened it up for Kali because probably that was the dharma, or that is what Kali was expected to do. Not that I agree with it myself or I'm convinced, but that's the logical conclusion that I'm leading to. That's all, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
No, and it's a very nice observation that you're saying, that by allowing Kali to reside in gold, he really allowed Kali to be everywhere. And so just to attempt to answer this question about why the gold, which, like you're saying, is now everywhere and it was everywhere, it's because, see, in previous times, Prabhupada makes this point, and I was just listening to a class, he was making this point. In previous times, the standardization of wealth was not gold, right? Gold standardization started now. In previous times, the standardization of wealth was land, grains, and cows. So wealth was measured in terms of the amount of grains you had, the land that you had, and the cows, the animals that you had. These were three things of wealth. In every culture, you'll see that. Even in American Indian culture, the head of the tribe would have many animals, would have land. They would, they would have a mountain or something like that they were in charge of, and they would have food. These were the three things. Everything else didn't matter so much. Now, if your standardization of wealth is in terms of food primarily, it's grains, then grains, you can eat only so much. Prabhupada says this one place, that you can have, this morning class I was listening, he was saying, you can have millions of dollars, but you'll still eat the same 6 chapatis. You can only eat so much. So previous times when wealth was not in terms of gold, but it was in terms of grains, then people could not become very greedy, because you can only store so many grains, otherwise they'll get wasted. And what is the use of grains if it gets wasted? And so ultimately you had to take those grains and you had to distribute them. The Brahmanas would get too much charity, and then they would go back and give the charity to others. By measuring wealth in terms of gold or in terms of paper, like this money that we have, basically in terms of a commodity that is not useful, that does not decay after some time, that increased people's greed, because then you can hoard and you can hoard and you can hoard and you can hoard, and you can enjoy, you can become very attached to the wealth. It increases the greed of society when it's gold standardized. You have $100,000 and now you need to make it into $1 million, because you can actually do that. There's a way to hoard things, to keep things. Just like today's billionaires, right? We see like Elon Musk, he's something like, what, $300 billion or more. I mean, it's like there's some study that came out that even if he constantly burned all his money, he could not burn it all in one lifetime. If he constantly threw money away, he was just walking down the street and throwing $100 bills away, he could not use that money. He clearly has more that even if he wants to use it, he cannot use it. With $300 billion, I mean, he cannot build a house large enough in which he can live. He cannot, eat something that enough that he can. It's like literally useless money. It's his ego. That money is attached to his ego, because even he himself, whatever he wants in this world, he cannot enjoy it because he has that much. So the Bhagavatam, especially in the 10th canto, in the section of Narad Muni speaking to Nala, Kuvera, and Manigriv, who are, when Narad Muni is walking down the forests of the heavenly planets, he sees Nala, Kuvera, and Manigriv dancing naked with other girls. And when he is dancing naked there, when Nala, Kuvera, and Manigriv are dancing, then he understands they're obviously engaging in illicit sex, right? And also in intoxication, they're drunk. And they're crazy, they're, I don't know about meat eating, but they're at least breaking 2 principles. They're drunk and they're dancing naked with women. And he immediately understands that the cause of this is their wealth. They're the sons of Kuvera. So the intoxication and the illicit sex came after the wealth, right? I mean, they were doing the sinful activities, but really the sinful activities, that was not the original sinful activity. The first one was their wealth, right? They have, Kuvera is the Lord of gold. He's the king of gold, of wealth. And then he says these beautiful verses where he says that there's nothing in this material world that is that bewildering, that is that detrimental to the spiritual life of a person than wealth, material wealth. And therefore, the devotee, he deals with material wealth like fire, right? Very, very carefully, because we can have it. We can be in charge of it. But the moment the moment it slightly shifts, so to say, it's not carefully handled, it has the capacity of burning us. It has the capacity of burning everything. We see in India and all around the world how entire families are broken apart just because of this money issue, the wealth. The brothers start fighting with one another. It's interesting, like literally now, no brother runs a business with another brother. In India, you'll see this as Kali Yuga is progressing. Everyone, they ultimately, they have their own shops, own this, just because wealth, this money is so difficult to handle. And so therefore, what is sannyas? What is the life of a renunciate? They voluntarily take a vow of poverty. This is also true in the Christian tradition, all these things. And one may think, why do they do that? I mean, why not lead a comfortable life and also practice spiritual life? Is because these saints and sages, they see the detriment, or you could say the fear, in amassing wealth. And there's nothing wrong in wealth itself. Wealth is the energy of the Lord. It is the power of the Lord. But by getting wealth, we become very disturbed. And so to avoid it, they stay away from that wealth. So now I will just share. So then in the second verse, Krishna, it's being mentioned that how all the leaders in society, all of those persons who are most have this leadership position, they should never be addicted to these four habits of meat eating, illicit sex, gambling, and intoxication. Because if they are addicted to this, then all of society becomes extremely fallen. And particularly, Srila Prabhupada here mentions this, that among the four irreligious principles, it says, especially illicit connection with women should be avoided. There's two things actually he mentions here. Illicit sex should be avoided. And in one place, Prabhupada, he writes, I remember reading one purport where Srila Prabhupada, he writes how he says that if one performs illicit sex once in his lifetime, then that person can never go back to Godhead unless, he says, that person gets the special mercy of the devotee. That you could say contamination or conditioning is so difficult. It is so conditioning to the soul. It creates such a material, you could say, desire in the heart that one cannot get rid of it unless one actually receives the mercy of the pure devotee of the Lord. And so the whole material civilization, this Western civilization, we see it's based on this principle of illicit sex life. And here I'm not just speaking about actually adultery or prostitution, but the whole culture, right? The television, the movies, the billboards, everything is glorifying this thing which is to be avoided, the illicit connection with women. Then the second thing that he says is truthfulness is the basic principle of all religions. So truthfulness, it's very interesting that honesty or truthfulness, among all things, I didn't expect that Srila Prabhupada would say this. I mean, I thought he'd say that mercy or vegetarianism is the basic principle of all religions. But he says that truthfulness is the basic principle of all religions, which is also interesting because of the four legs of dharma, the only leg that is still there but it's wobbling is truthfulness. And Srila Prabhupada says that once that leg is broken, then there will be all mayhem in society. Then the real Kali Yuga will come. The whole Kali Yuga will take, will destroy everything. So truthfulness is very, very important. And as devotees, we sometimes, because we are, engaged in such a higher spiritual activity, we sometimes think that these basic moral principles of honesty, truthfulness, are not very important for devotees. But these are very, very important. And the best example of this is in the story of Bali Maharaj, where Bali Maharaj gave up his spiritual master. He rejected his spiritual master because his spiritual master did not want him to adhere to the principle of truthfulness, especially towards the Lord, right? Especially towards the Lord. And we see that how Lord Ram, he gave up his whole kingdom. He gave up everything he had in this world just to adhere to the principle of truthfulness. Right? Lord Ramachandra knew that by going to the forest, his father would die out of separation. And so he was really not going to the forest for his father, for the honor of his father, or for out of affection for his father. He was going to the forest out of the adherence to dharma. And that dharma was truthfulness. First principle of dharma was truthfulness. Because as a king, as a leader, if he didn't show to society, if he did not show to society this perfect example of following through with one's vows, with one's promises, then the rest of society, all the citizens would have followed his example and also would not have followed their vows, right? So this is particularly why Prabhupada here is emphasizing that the king, the sannyasi, the brahmana, and the public leader, these are the leaders of society. These are the guides of society. People follow them. They especially have to follow these principles. Others do or don't, it doesn't matter. But they must be, Prabhupada says, crucially tested very carefully, that they're following these principles before they are given those positions. Why? Because they have to uphold these principles. And of all the principles, Prabhupada is saying truthfulness is the basic principle of all religions. Why is he saying this? Why not other things? Because truthfulness has a very broad implication. Right? Truthfulness is not just that I said something to someone and I didn't follow through with it. Truthfulness is also the adherence to one's vows. And that's the basis of actually all four of these regulative principles. For example, going back to illicit sex life, right? Prabhupada is saying, especially this one is very important for human society to avoid and to follow the dharma of relationships that are responsible, that are through marriage. So what is the basic principle of illicit sex life? It's untruthfulness. Right? We make a vow in front of the fire, in front of the families, in front of the deity, in front of the spiritual master. We make a vow that I will stay together till death, right? This is the vow of marriage. And then due to untruthfulness in society, people break that vow and then they have adultery, right? And here I'm not referring to, sometimes a relationship cannot go forward because it's very abusive or there's some problem there. Here I'm speaking about illicit sex life, that adultery, cheating, things like that. So it happens because of a lack of truthfulness, where in society the value of honesty in one's vows to another person is not valued. And this was our previous leaders, or in society, in the heads of state and the country, if they are not, at least it used to be, if they were not true to their vows of marriage, then people took it very seriously, because this was setting an example for the rest of society. Then we have truthfulness in terms of the spiritual vows that we make. At the time of initiation, we vow to follow these four principles. No meat eating, no illicit sex, no gambling, no intoxication, and to chant the holy name 16 rounds every single day. So that is also a principle, the vows that we made. And it's the basic, truthfulness is the basic principle of religions, because then we will keep up those vows. We will uphold those vows if we are true to our word. So all of our other spiritual activities are resting on this principle of keeping our vows. And in one class, Prabhupada says how the vows of a devotee are his wealth. So when for a devotee, the material wealth doesn't mean anything, right? But what is the real wealth of a devotee then? The wealth of a devotee are his vows. And so now, just as this on this final point about how the public leaders must have these qualifications before they can become leaders. Prabhupada is making this point. This is the very important point that he's making, that we must have these principles before we have these positions. This is actually very much the first verse of the Upadeshamrita. Vacho vegam manasakrodha vegam jivva vegam udarapastha vegam etan vegan yo vishaheta dhira prativim sashishyat. That people can make disciples all over the world if they have fulfilled this vow. So I'm going to share this verse here. A sober person who can tolerate the urge to speak, the mind's demands, the actions of anger, and the urges of the tongue, belly, and genitals is qualified to make disciples all over the world. A sober person who can tolerate the urge to speak, the mind's demands, the actions of anger, and the urges of the tongue, belly, and genitals is qualified to make disciples all over the world. Right? So in order to become a spiritual master, and a parent is a spiritual master, a king is a spiritual master, in order to become a spiritual master, one has to have control over these things. And when one can have control over these things, then that person is able to make disciples all over the world. And on this point, I just want to share some points here that I have. I think it will be easier to see it, so that's why I'm sharing it. So the veghams, the urges, are of 5 different types. The first one is vacha, that the leader must have control over speech. Right? So this is the one function of the tongue, is speaking. The other is eating. So the leader must have control over speech. They must have control over their mind, control over anger, control over the tongue. This is what we eat. This is no meat eating. And then udarapastha, of the belly and the genitals. So these 4 regulated principles that here are being emphasized in the Bhagavatam verse are present in these principles that Rupa Goswami is mentioning in this verse, of the first verse of the Upadeshamrita. Illicit sex life is this last one, belly and genitals. Meat eating is related to the tongue. Intoxication is related to anger, right? When we are intoxicated, so much of domestic abuse, criminal activity happens at the time of intoxication. And gambling is related to speech and mind, because gambling is by definition dishonesty. So we don't have control of our speech. We're not saying things that are true. Similarly, gambling is very bad because it constantly makes the mind churn, right? It constantly agitates the mind. It makes the mind speculate. So then you cannot control the mind. I'll tell you of a personal experience that I had where one time I went into a store, and in that store, they were doing a raffle for bikes, and it was a free raffle. So somehow, just as a promotion, so people come inside the store. This is like Shopko, a very common store. They had said that anyone who comes in the store, they can, and I didn't know this before going into the store. No one knew, but just anyone who came in the store could fill out a ticket and put your name and your phone number, and you can put it in the basket. And in 1 month's time, I mean, you can imagine how many people come in the store, and after 1 month, in 1 month's time, and all those raffle tickets, they'll pull out one, and whoever gets that will get the bike. So I was maybe like 12, 13 years old at that time. So I went into the store and I filled out the ticket and I put it in. I was with my mother at that time. So we were all like, my brother was there also. Like, we were just, innocently, we filled it out. We thought, well, it's free of charge, there's nothing. And I still remember that just about every single night until that 1 month passed, I would think that I'm going to get that bike. That bike, I know it's going to be my ticket. And every single day I'd think about that ticket. So this is what gambling does. I didn't pay anything for it. It wasn't like you give $5 and then you get this thing back. But when you engage in that, it's like once you are in that cycle of speculation, then you think, I'm going to get it. And that happens. So these are the 5 vegams that we must overcome. And overcoming these 5 vegams allows us to become a guru, a spiritual master. But in order to overcome these 5 vegams, or rather overcoming these 5 vegams, means following the 4 regulative principles. Because those 4 regulative principles allow us to control the speech, the mind, the anger, the tongue, the belly, and the genitals. And finally, also the 5th principle of not getting wealth for ourselves, right? Keeping careful with the gold part, the money part. That's the 5th thing. So I'm going to skip a few things here, and I'm going to go to one quote of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, where someone may say, but okay, so on this principle of gold, because I want to sort of end with this point, because I started with this point, and now having mentioned this, that how all the other principles are broken with this principle of wealth. It all starts with gold, the money part. Then how do we know how much is too much? How do we know what are the wrong kinds of wealth? The fact is that we still need wealth. And the fact is that many devotees are earning wealth for Krishna, or they're from very wealthy families. So how do we practically handle this? What is the practical application of this caution that is being given in the Bhagavatam? And to this, Bhaktivinoda Thakur directly replies. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur is a very nice person to hear from, because he was a family man himself. He was the father of 9 children. He was a judge. He was, had good means. He had some wealth. So he says, if one accepts sense objects in the spirit of enjoyment, that is atyahara. Atyahara prayashasya prajalpanyamaga. That is accepting too much. That will hurt us. But if sense objects are accepted as the Lord's mercy, and only as far as required and favorable for devotional service, then it is not atyahara. If sense objects are honestly accepted as the Lord's mercy, then yukta vairagya is easily attained. If sense objects are honestly accepted as the Lord's mercy, then yukta vairagya is easily attained. Srimad Mahaprabhu's order is to accept sense objects without attachment and chant Krishna's name. So in order to not practice atyahara, accepting too much, we must engage in the activity of yukta vairagya. And we can only engage in the activity of yukta vairagya, meaning engaging everything in the Lord's service, if we accept everything as the Lord's mercy, not as something that is I deserve or something that I have earned due to my hard work. Prabhupada in one lecture was just saying, I was hearing his lecture, he was saying that people will work so hard, and one person will be working his whole life, but still he won't know where his next meal is coming from. And another person is working, and that person becomes a millionaire. So our work plays an important role, but our work is not the only reason why we get what we get. Ultimately, it is the Lord's mercy, which is meted out in different ways. Sometimes the Lord's mercy is no, don't get it. Other times mercy is he gives it. But in either case, the Lord accepts it as the Lord's mercy. And because he accepts it as the Lord's mercy, therefore, he knows that it belongs to the Lord. It's the Lord's mercy, so this belongs to the Lord. So therefore, let me engage it right back in the Lord's service. That is the only way to handle gold. And for ourselves, we accept only as far as required and as favorable for devotional service. So the sense objects have to be accepted as the Lord's mercy. That's the first principle. It is not mine, it's the Lord. For my own maintenance, I will accept only as far as required, nothing more than what is needed, which is also different for different people based upon their living standard and based upon their level of advancement. So that changes. And accept that which is favorable for devotional service. Just this point, somehow it reminds me of one quote from Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, which says that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that it is better to live amongst lions and tigers and surrounded by fire and iron bars in the association of devotees than to live in a very comfortable position away from the association of devotees, or he says, rather than to live in a comfortable position, but in the association of materialists. And he says that the devotee is very afraid of who he calls the common man, the ordinary man, who's just a pounds and shillings person, who are sense enjoyers. They're very afraid of their association, because their association is very contaminating. We also start to think in that way. And those who are saintly, the saintly devotees of the Lord, they stay far away from this gramya katha, this ordinary mundane talks and mundane socialization, friends, family, friendship and love, these material things, which are so normal in this society. But the devotee stays far away from it, because associating with that is not favorable for our devotional service. Rather, even if we have to go through so many difficulties, but if we are in the association of devotees, he says, I accept that as a better living standard. So we definitely can accept things as they're required, but only for the service of the Lord, and accepting everything as the Lord's mercy and engaging everything in the Lord's service. That is the proper use of gold. Gold has so much use, but only for the service of the Lord. And we see this, that in the Mahabharata at the end, because there was no gold standard and everyone, what they valued was grains and cows, things that you can actually eat and use. Then when the Ashwamedh Yajna happened, then Arjuna goes out to find gold, because you need gold for the Ashwamedh Yajna. You need a lot of gold. I mean, those yajnas required, huge quantities of gold. And Arjuna finds it very easily, because at that time it was readily available. There wasn't, people didn't care for it. It's like, the fact is, what do you do with gold? You don't eat it, you don't drink it, you can't exactly live on it. It's just something. It's like a shiny piece of stone with which you can make some jewelry or something like this, right? So in higher societies, they don't have value for this in the very advanced civilizations. So they would make some, maybe cups or pots and pans out of gold. And Prabhupada describes that at that time, when they would have meals, they would make it golden plates, and it was like use and throw. Like we have paper plates now. They would have the golden plate, and then they would throw it in the dustbin, in the ditch. And so even normal people, they could find, tons of gold utensils. So Arjuna, he goes out and he gets gold. But why does he get the gold? He gets the gold for the sacrifice, for the Ashwamedha Yajna. Otherwise, he didn't have much use for it. Otherwise, they didn't go to their treasury and pull it out, because they didn't have any in their treasury. He went to some mountains, and there was gold, and he took the gold and he brought it back for the sacrifice. So same thing as devotees, we're trying to do the same thing. We earn the money, or we may get this wealth, and we're just doing it for the service of the Lord. We accept it and we offer it to the Lord. And I think I have a few more minutes, so I just want to share one more thing. I'm sorry, I have many things to share today. Somehow this verse was like this. I want to share one verse from this narration of Bali Maharaj. As I mentioned in my talk, that how Bali Maharaj was the example of truthfulness and how he was fixed in his truthfulness, in his vows, like all us devotees should be, that no matter what happens, we're fixed in our vows to the spiritual master, our vows to Krishna. So this beautiful verse, I just want to read this. It's one of my favorite verses. O King, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vamandev, then spoke to Bali Maharaj, the most liberal and celebrated personality, whom he had arrested with the ropes of Varuna. Bali Maharaj had lost all bodily luster, but he was nonetheless fixed in his determination. Purport. When one is bereft of all his possessions, he is certainly reduced in bodily luster. But although Bali Maharaj had lost everything, he was fixed in his determination to satisfy Vamanadev, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In Bhagavad Gita, such a person is called Sthita Pragya. A pure devotee is never deviated from the service of the Lord, despite all difficulties and impediments offered by the illusory energy. Generally, men who have wealth and opulence are famous, but Bali Maharaj became famous for all time by being deprived of all his possessions. The sentence is very nice. Generally, men who have wealth and opulence are famous, but Bali Maharaj became famous for all time by being deprived of all his possessions. This is the special mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead toward his devotees. The Lord says, Yasyaham anugrahami harishye tad dhanam shanai. As the first installment of his special favor, the Lord takes away all the possessions of his devotees. A devotee, however, is never disturbed by such a loss. He continues his service, and the Lord amply rewards him beyond the expectations of any common man. So this is a very nice verse, very relevant to what we're reading. That Prabhupada here is saying, this particular sentence I really like. In the translation, this sentence there. Bali Maharaj had lost all his bodily luster, but he was nonetheless fixed in his determination. So in this age, it's actually very difficult to follow these vows, the 4 regulative principles, and chanting our 16 rounds. Anyone who can do this is literally a pure devotee. If we can do these 5 things, but in order to do those 5 things, we have to associate with devotees, we have to perform service, we have to read books, because to keep these vows on this day and age is very difficult. But we need to be fixed in our determination. And through that determination, through fulfilling our vows, one day Krishna reveals himself to that devotee. And this is what I think about Bali Maharaj's story, which is his pastime, which is so nice. It's like Bali Maharaj gets the opportunity to surrender everything to the Lord, right? By fulfilling his vow to the Lord, he gets the chance, he gets the blessing of being able to surrender everything to the Lord. And how nice that is, right? I think how wonderful that is, that if someone gets that chance, if we get that chance to just surrender everything to the Lord and have nothing ourselves, everything for the Lord, what a great blessing that is. So this all comes by the small things, apparently small things, which are very big things, which is keeping our vows. So I will stop at that point. If there's any comments or questions, we can discuss at this point.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare
Please
Krishna.
accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Guru Maharaj and Srila Prabhupada. I'm Vinod Haridas. It was really interesting, and some of the points you elaborated very nicely. One thing it made me think is the example you gave me. What is that? The raffle tickets and buying the bike, right? So it actually, broadened the boundary of gambling.
Yes.
So in day-to-day life, we actually plan something, expecting something. So planning is all about, meeting some expectation, right?
Yes.
So that expectation might come true in one day or in a month. So till that time, we'll be, keep on checking whether our plan is right. So do you think that is also gambling, part of gambling?
Yes, it's not maybe gambling per se, but it's the same anartha, so to say, of speculation, of hankering, because that passage that we read, that how the devotee of the Lord, Bhaktivinoda Thakur's quote, sees any wealth that he gets as the favor of the Lord, right, as a mercy of the Lord. So if we're thinking too much about whether or not our plans will be successful, then that means we're forgetting or we're not recognizing, we're not remembering that if something does work out, it will work out by the mercy of the Lord, that the favor of the Lord has to be there. And it's very nice that you brought up this point, because in my own life, I at one point, somewhat recently, I realized, I had a realization regarding this point also, that, okay, I'm trying hard for this, but if it's going to work out, then it's going to work out by the mercy of the Lord. So I don't have to keep checking, like you're saying. I don't have to keep thinking about it. And thinking about it too much, planning too much, investing too much, or being worried about those things too much is me feeling that I'm the controller and forgetting that Krishna is the controller. Like Prabhupada was saying, someone works hard and they stay a pauper. They lose the money, or like Prabhupada's business failed. And other people work hard and it succeeds. So our part is to do the duty, to make the effort. But the success is in the Lord's hands. And if we think about it less, then we also have time to do our sadhana. Otherwise, our life becomes sort of overcome by these things, which was happening to me. I became just absorbed in this too much. So that's the principle of remembering that I'm doing my service to the Lord, but the result is in the Lord's hands.
So in that case, can I think something like, you can plan, we can plan and execute it and never worry about the result of it. In that case, it will not be gambling, right?
Yes. Now, one caveat to that is Prabhupada says that the devotee does take anxiety for the Lord. So if there's some service for the Lord, the devotee worries about it. And also the devotee may also even worry about his family and his material things. They may have some worry there. But the point is, too much worry is forgetting that Krishna is helping me here. I'm forgetting that actually he's also looking after me. So I don't have to worry too much. Like Mother Malati one time told me, Mother Malati, who's Srila Prabhupada's disciple, she mentioned how even in temple decisions and service to the Lord, we make the decision, but then we depend on Lord Nrsingadev, she said, to protect us from going down the wrong route. Right? So even in a temple, there's so many decisions, like buy this land or that land, construct this in this way or in this way. So how much can the devotee worry? Well, the devotee is worried for the Lord. He makes the decisions. He does all of his research. He does it very carefully. But then he has to depend on the Lord. And he prays to Lord Nrsingadev. So he's continuously praying also, because then Lord Nrsingadev will protect him from making the wrong decision. Yes. And that's why in the case of stocks, for example, this is one practical thing. Like I've seen that devotees, like my own father, he would invest in long-term stocks, like stocks that don't change that much. And, it's just like there's a stability, but not in the very volatile short-term stocks, because that was more like, okay, I have to invest something, the company forces you, or almost like you have to invest. And so it's there. But then on those stocks, you can check it every day if you want, but there's no point in it. After a while, you notice it doesn't change much. It's kind of like a stable investment. Or we invest in some real estate. Ultimately, people need a home to live. So it'll always have some value. So the devotee chooses his decisions based on what will give him less anxiety, So he has more time for Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. That helps. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you so much for a wonderful class. Regarding that standardization of gold that beginning of Kali Yuga,
Yes.
right? So, I mean, I think you brought it up nicely. I mean, the grains and the land, that was the real wealth, right? People used it to consider. So, the example, that thought came to me, the Arjuna's thing, the example that you gave when they were doing the yajna. He was told to get the gold from the Himalayas.
Yes.
So, if that was not considered as wealth, right? So, of course, he explained it, but that was only for the purpose of yajna. But still, gold was, my
Yes.
clarification, Prabhu, I need is that gold was considered as wealth, but it's people not use it to store it. In the sense that, I don't know if that was not used for the trading, right? Was that right?
Yes. So it's a good point that you bring up. It was considered wealth, like the kings did have their treasuries. But the point is that people didn't care for it much because the real wealth was greens. The greens you can eat, and the thing about greens is when that was the standardization of wealth. The issue is about standardization of wealth. So in the case of greens, it's wealth, but the main point there is that you cannot become too greedy with it because it's a perishable item. You see, like you cannot amass 300 billion bags of greens, right? Like Elon Musk can have $300 billion. He cannot have 300 billion bags of greens because it's just going to rot. So it limited the greed of society. Now, in terms of gold, so the standardization was trading.
Yes.
It was not even greens, it was just trading. So I give you greens, you give me milk. So when there's no standardization of wealth in terms of gold or dollars, paper, then there's no greed because you just take what you need and you trade accordingly. And so the same thing was true of gold. Well, okay, if you need food first or gold first, you'll obviously take food first. So then people who had gold were people who didn't need food, and maybe they were a farmer, they had a lot of grain, so they would give a few bags of grain and get some gold, maybe for the wedding, for the jewelry. But wealth itself was not gold like it is now.
Yeah.
It was just one of the many things that you trade.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it's 8:30, so unless there's any other comment or question, we can end at this point.
Can I ask one more question, Prabhu? It is out of curiosity. So actually devotees take these 4 vows, right? And also you mentioned that truthfulness is the root of all the religion,
yes.
Right? So why, I felt that this also be one of the vow that, I'll stay truthful, right? Along with 4 vows.
Yes.
So why, I was thinking why Srila Prabhupada did not include that in the 4 vows.
No, it is included. That's the thing, that Prabhupada gave these 4 regulative principles because they break the 4 principles of religion. So gambling breaks truthfulness, right? Gambling is all about cheating. So when he says no gambling, it means no dishonesty. So Prabhupada mentions specific things because these are specific vices in this world that we, as the devotees of the Lord, want to fight against. This is our fight against Maya. And even most civilized countries, they outlaw these 4 things. Gambling is still outlawed in most states in America. So in many states, and now as Kali Yuga progresses, it's being like that. So that's why he mentions these 4 specific vices. But these 4 specific vices represent 4 general habits. So gambling represents dishonesty. So we have to give up dishonesty, speculation, duplicity. This is all part of gambling. Like, not being straightforward, just always, saying something, doing something else. So that's the general habit that it is removing. Illicit sex is breaking cleanliness. It's not clean behavior. Right? We say that man is unclean. It's actually an English jargon to say when someone's behavior is not, straightforward. So So illicit sex causes disease and uncleanliness. So that's the general thing about illicit sex. Then meat eating breaks the quality of mercy. So a principle of life is we should be compassionate and merciful towards everyone. We have to be compassionate and merciful. That is the quality of a great soul. That includes the animals. And because the greatest vice in this time is the slaughterhouses, literally, I think 1 billion animals get slaughtered every year in America. It's like unbelievable. That's why that specific thing is mentioned, because we need to do that before we do anything else. But it's the general habit of mercilessness. And then the fourth one is intoxication, which breaks self-control, which is overcoming anger, which is the Vacho Vegam verse. That's why also that verse I mentioned and how that relates with these four things. That intoxication allows us to fall into the pitfall of anger. So overcoming anger means giving up intoxication. So this is one of the truthfulness is epitomized by the principle of gambling. No gambling.
Okay, Prabhu. So it's basically it's an underlined principle that we need to follow to uphold these four principles, right?
Yes, yes. Yeah, and that's why even if we're not doing these things in a gross way, right, the four ideal principles, the devotee is still always striving to follow these principles more and more, because only on the level of a pure devotee actually are we actually following these four principles to the fullest extent. So someone may give up gambling, so they're not going to the lottery or not doing that, but the cheating mentality may not go away. And so devotees also thinking that way.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you. Nice. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for your kind attention, and I hope it was okay. The class. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.